A storm unveils secrets in a billionaire's grand mansion. In the dimly lit parlor, Elena Torres cradles William Grayson on a velvet sofa, his frail frame trembling as he weeps, whispering, "Don't let her take me." Her warm eyes shield the tycoon, lost to Alzheimer's, from fear's grip. Daniel Grayson, a white billionaire hardened by wealth, returns from a distant journey, his heart breaking as he sees his father's tears. "What the hell is going on here?" he demands, his voice raw with shock, as Elena's tender embrace reveals a bond beyond duty. Margaret's shadow looms, her lies threatening a vast fortune. What truth does Elena guard? Can love heal a fractured dynasty? Join this gripping tale of betrayal and courage, where a white billionaire faces his family's secrets. Hit like, share, and subscribe for more stories of truth. Where are you watching from? Comment below. The Grayson mansion stood like a fortress against the howling night, its towering windows trembling under the relentless assault of the storm. Rain lashed the Italian marble of the grand foyer, each drop a drum beat in the symphony of chaos that echoed through the estate. Lightning tore across the sky, casting jagged shadows that danced like specters on the polished floor. The air was thick with the scent of wet stone and impending dread, a tension so palpable it seemed to pulse with the thunder. In the heart of this opulent prison, Elena Torres knelt, her arms wrapped protectively around William Grayson, the frail patriarch whose name once commanded empires but now barely held his own memories. Elena's heart pounded, not from the storm's fury, but from the weight of William's trembling frame against her chest. At 28, her warm brown eyes carried a depth beyond her years, etched by nights spent soothing the fears of a man lost in the fog of Alzheimer's. Her simple maid's uniform, black, crisp, unassuming, clung to her skin, damp from the draft seeping through the windows. William's silver hair pressed against her shoulder, his hands clutching her sleeve as if she were the only anchor in a world unraveling. His breath came in shallow gasps, each one laced with a childlike fear that broke Elena's heart anew. "It's just the thunder, Mr. Grayson," she whispered, her voice a soft melody against the storm's roar. "You're safe with me." Her words were steady, but inside, her chest tightened with a fierce resolve to protect him, a promise she'd made not just to her employer, but to the fragile soul who'd come to feel like family. William's eyes, clouded with confusion, flickered with a fleeting spark of trust, and he murmured something incoherent, his fingers tightening on her arm. The heavy oak doors of the foyer slammed open, the sound slicing through the air like a gunshot. Margaret Grayson swept in, her emerald evening gown shimmering under the flickering chandelier light. At 50-something, her sharp features were a mask of calculated beauty, but the bourbon in her hand and the unsteadiness in her step betrayed her unraveling composure. Her green eyes locked onto Elena and William, narrowing into slits of venomous disdain. The air seemed to tighten, the storm outside a mere whisper compared to the tempest brewing in Margaret's gaze. "Get your filthy hands off him this instant!" Margaret's voice cut like a blade, sharp and cold, echoing off the marble walls. Elena froze, her arms still cradling William, her heart racing as she felt his trembling intensify. Margaret's designer heels clicked with predatory precision, each step a declaration of her dominion over this house and everyone in it. The crystal tumbler in her hand glinted, the bourbon sloshing as she advanced, her face twisted with a fury that felt both personal and primal. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced her voice to remain calm, a lifeline for William's fragile state. "Mrs. Grayson, he was scared. He asked me to stay." Her words were measured, each syllable a shield against the accusation in Margaret's glare. But inside, fear coiled like a snake, not for herself, but for the man who clung to her, his whimpers barely audible over the storm. William's voice, frail and broken, broke through the tension. Don't let her take me, Elena," he whispered, his words a desperate plea that pierced her soul. Margaret's composure shattered, her voice rising to a shriek that rattled the chandelier. "You're nothing but hired help," she spat, her manicured finger jabbing toward Elena like a weapon. "I own this house, and when my husband dies, I'll decide who touches him." Her words dripped with contempt, each one a lash meant to strip Elena of her dignity. But Elena's resolve held firm, her arms tightening around William as she met Margaret's gaze with quiet defiance. She would not break, not when William needed her most. The storm outside roared, lightning illuminating the foyer in a stark white flash, casting Margaret's shadow long and menacing. She raised the crystal tumbler high, her eyes blazing with a mix of rage and triumph. Time seemed to slow as Elena's instincts took over. She turned her body, shielding William from the impending blow, her heart hammering with a primal need to protect. The tumbler flew, a glittering missile that struck Elena's back with a sickening crash. Glass shards exploded across her uniform, bourbon soaking through the fabric, stinging the fresh wounds. A gasp tore from her lips, pain flaring like fire. But her arms never wavered, holding William close as he whimpered against her. Elena's knees buckled slightly, the pain a white-hot lance through her spine. But she refused to let go. Her breath came in sharp bursts, each one a battle to stay composed for William's sake. His trembling hands clung to her, his voice a faint broken whisper. "Elena." "Safe," he murmured, his words a fragile thread tying her to her purpose. Tears pricked her eyes, not from the pain, but from the weight of his trust, a trust she would not betray. Margaret stood back, her chest heaving, a satisfied smirk curling her lips as she surveyed the wreckage. The foyer was a battlefield, shards of glass glittering like fallen stars, bourbon pooling on the marble, and Elena's blood seeping through her uniform. Yet in that moment, Elena felt a quiet strength rising within her, a fire kindled by years of caring for a man who had no one else. She straightened, her eyes locking onto Margaret's, a silent vow that this was not the end. Somewhere in the shadows, unseen by the trio, the storm's chaos masked the sound of approaching footsteps. The mansion held its breath, as if sensing the truth that lay just beyond the horizon, waiting to break free. The grand foyer of the Grayson mansion was a shattered tableau, a battlefield strewn with the wreckage of an antique vase, its porcelain shards glittering like broken promises on the Italian marble floor. Rain hammered the towering windows, each gust of wind rattling the panes as if the storm itself were demanding answers. The chandelier above flickered, its warm amber light casting an unsteady glow over the scene, where shadows twisted like specters of betrayal. Elena Torres knelt beside William Grayson, her blood-soaked uniform a stark contrast to the frail patriarch's trembling form. Her arms, though aching from the impact of the vase, remained a steadfast shield around him, her warm brown eyes burning with a quiet defiance that refused to break. William's silver hair was damp with sweat, his hands clutching her sleeve as he murmured incoherently, lost in the fog of his fractured mind. The air was heavy with the scent of bourbon and blood, the storm's roar a distant echo to the chaos unfolding within these walls. Elena's heart thudded, a relentless drumbeat of fear and resolve. The pain in her back seared with every breath, but it was William's whimpers that cut deeper, each one a reminder of her vow to protect him. She pressed her cheek against his, whispering softly, "It's all right, Mr. Grayson, I'm here." Her voice was a lifeline, steady despite the fire in her wounds, her every word laced with a tenderness born of 3 years caring for a man who had no one else. William's eyes, clouded with Alzheimer's, flickered with a fleeting recognition, and his trembling hand tightened on her arm as if she alone could tether him to reality. Margaret Grayson stood a few paces away, her emerald gown catching the chandelier's faltering light like a venomous serpent poised to strike. Her sharp features were a mask of triumph, her lips curled into a smirk that barely concealed the bourbon-fueled rage beneath. The crystal tumbler was gone, its remnants scattered across the floor, but her hands still trembled with the thrill of her outburst. She reveled in the chaos, her green eyes glinting with a cruel satisfaction as she watched Elena's blood seep through her uniform. To Margaret, this was not just a moment of control. It was a declaration of her dominion, a reminder that in this house her will was law. But the storm had not yet played its final card. From the shadowed archway of the east wing, a new presence emerged, his footsteps muffled by the thunder, but heavy with purpose. Daniel Grayson, the billionaire heir to the Grayson Empire, stood frozen in the doorway, his tailored Armani suit forgotten in the face of the scene before him. At 40-something, His steel blue eyes were sharp, but weariness clung to him like the weight of 1,000 boardroom battles. His leather briefcase slipped from his hand, landing with a dull thud as he took in the sight. His father sobbing in the arms of their maid, his wife radiating smug triumph, and the floor littered with glass and blood. His heart clenched, a visceral ache that drowned out the storm's fury. This was his home, his family, yet it felt like a stranger's nightmare. "What the hell is going on here?" Daniel's voice boomed, a deep, authoritative roar that cut through the foyer's tension like a blade. His Italian leather shoes crunched on the broken porcelain as he strode forward, his gaze darting between the three figures. Elena's breath caught, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment, a silent plea for understanding buried beneath her pain. William whimpered, his frail form shrinking further into her embrace, while Margaret spun like a dancer caught mid-performance, her expression morphing from triumph to victimized sorrow in an instant. Crocodile tears shimmered in her green eyes, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "Oh, Daniel, thank God you're home," Margaret cried, her hands fluttering to her chest as if to steady her heart. "This woman attacked your father. She's been filling his head with lies, turning him against us." Her words were a masterclass in deception, each syllable crafted to paint her as the wronged wife, the protector of the Grayson legacy. But Daniel's eyes lingered on Elena, on the blood staining her uniform, on the way her arms never faltered around his father. Doubt crept into his chest, a cold, gnawing suspicion that refused to align with Margaret's story. Elena winced, her hand pressing against her wounded back, the blood seeping through her fingers like a silent accusation. Her voice, though soft, carried a steady resolve that belied the pain coursing through her. "That's not true, Mr. Grayson," she said, her eyes locking on to Daniel's with quiet courage. "I was helping him to bed. He was frightened by the storm, so I stayed." Her words were simple, unadorned, yet they carried the weight of truth, a truth Daniel felt but couldn't yet grasp. Margaret's voice rose to a fever pitch, her manicured hands gesturing wildly as she stepped closer to Daniel. "She's lying!" she shrieked, her composure unraveling. "Look at the blood, Daniel. She became violent when I tried to stop her. We can't have dangerous people in our home." Her performance was flawless, her tears a glittering facade. But Daniel's gaze flickered to the floor, to the shards of porcelain, to the bourbon pooling like a stain on his family's honor. William raised a trembling hand, pointing weakly at Elena, his mouth struggling to form words. She saved," he whispered, his voice dissolving into the fog of his illness. Margaret seized the moment, her tone sharp and dismissive. "He's confused, Daniel. The disease, you know how it warps his mind." Her words were a calculated strike, meant to bury the truth beneath the weight of William's condition. Daniel's jaw clenched, his steel blue eyes darting between his father's tear-streaked face, Margaret's false tears, and Elena's bloodied resolve. His heart pounded with a mix of anger and uncertainty, the scene before him a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but the evidence seemed to tilt toward his wife's story. "Elena," he said slowly, his voice heavy with a disappointment he didn't fully understand. "Please go clean yourself up. We'll discuss this in the morning." Elena's heart shattered, the weight of his words a blow heavier than the vase. She looked down at William, whose confused eyes pleaded with her not to leave. Her throat tightened, but she nodded, her dignity unbroken. Gently, she guided William to a velvet chair, whispering, "Rest now, Mr. Grayson. I'll be back." As she rose, her eyes caught Robert, the head butler, lingering near the staircase. With a subtle motion, she slipped a small wooden box into his hand, her expression a silent plea for secrecy. Robert nodded, his kind eyes promising to guard her trust. The foyer fell silent, save for the storm's relentless drumming, as Elena disappeared down the service corridor, her bloodied silhouette a testament to her sacrifice. Daniel stood rooted, his heart a battleground of doubt and dread, unaware that the truth was closer than he could imagine. The service corridor of the Grayson mansion was a world apart from the grandeur of the foyer, its narrow walls lined with worn wooden panels that seemed to whisper secrets of decades past. Dim amber light spilled from wall sconces, casting long shadows that flickered like ghosts in the wake of the storm outside. The distant rumble of thunder was a faint echo now, but the air remained heavy, saturated with the weight of unspoken truths. Elena Torres sat on a rickety stool in the cramped staff quarters, her blood-stained maid's uniform clinging to her skin, the fabric a map of her sacrifice. The pain in her back throbbed with every heartbeat, a searing reminder of the shattered vase and Margaret's venomous rage. Yet it was not the wounds on her body that cut deepest. It was the sting of Daniel's dismissal, his words still ringing in her ears. "We'll discuss this in the morning." Her heart ached, not for herself, but for William, the frail patriarch she'd sworn to protect, whose trust she now feared she'd betrayed. Elena's hands trembled as she applied medical tape to the gauze on her back, each movement a battle against the fire in her wounds. Her warm brown eyes, reflected in a small cracked mirror, were pools of exhaustion and resolve, glistening with unshed tears she refused to let fall. At 28, she carried a quiet strength, forged in years of caring for others, while her own dreams, of college, of a future beyond these walls, hung by a thread. She pressed the tape down, wincing, and whispered to herself, "I promised him I'd stay. I won't break that promise." Her voice was soft, a vow spoken to the empty room, but it carried the weight of a sacred oath. William's frightened whimpers still echoed in her mind, his trembling hands clutching her sleeve as if she were his only anchor. The thought of leaving him alone in that cold mansion, at the mercy of Margaret's cruelty, was a dagger to her soul. The door creaked open, and Robert, the head butler, stepped into the dim light. At 60, his gray suit was as crisp as his loyalty, but his kind eyes were heavy with concern, lines etched deep by years of witnessing the Grayson family's unraveling. He clutched the small wooden box Elena had slipped into his hand in the foyer, its weight a silent question between them. "Elena," he said, his voice low and urgent, "what's in this box? You're in enough trouble already." His gaze flickered down the corridor, ensuring they were alone, his posture tense with the instinct of a man who'd seen too many secrets buried in this house. Elena looked up, her hands pausing mid-motion, the pain in her back momentarily forgotten. "It's from Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "He said it's important, but not yet. Please, Robert, keep it safe." Her eyes met his, a silent plea that carried the weight of her trust. The box was more than wooden hinges. It was William's last act of clarity, a fragment of his mind she'd sworn to protect. Robert hesitated, his brow furrowing, but he nodded, slipping the box into his pocket with a reverence that spoke of his unspoken faith in her. He leaned against the doorframe, his voice dropping to a whisper. 30 years I've served this family," he said, his tone heavy with the weight of memory. "That Margaret, she's got no heart for Mr. Grayson. But you, Elena, you've got more integrity than most." His words were a balm, a flicker of warmth in the cold reality of her situation, but they couldn't erase the ache in her chest. Elena's lips curved into a faint, weary smile, but her eyes betrayed the storm within. Fear for William, anger at the injustice, and a gnawing dread that her time in this house was running out. In the adjacent kitchen, the cook, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a flour-dusted apron, paused over her cutting board, her hands still as she overheard Robert's words. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes darting toward the corridor. "The staff's talking, Robert," she said, her tone laced with caution. "Some believe Elena's innocent. Others are too scared of Mrs. Grayson to say it out loud." Her words hung in the air, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny that had gripped the mansion. The camera lingered on her face, the lines of worry etched deep, a mirror to the unspoken fears of those who served in the shadows. Elena's phone buzzed on the table, a faint glow illuminating a message from her mother in Phoenix. "Saved enough for college yet?" The words were a punch to her gut, a reminder of the dreams she'd put on hold to care for William. She stared at the screen, her future a fragile thread stretched taut by the night's events. Her job, her stability, her purpose, all hung in the balance, and the weight of it pressed against her chest, threatening to crush her resolve. But she closed her eyes, picturing William's frightened face, his whispered plea. Don't let her take me. That memory was her anchor, her reason to keep going. The storm outside had softened to a steady patter, but the mansion felt colder than ever, its opulence a hollow shell around the hearts that beat within. Elena rose, her movements slow but deliberate, each step a defiance against the pain and the injustice. She tucked the mirror away, her reflection fading into the dim light, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. She would not abandon William, not when he needed her most. As she straightened her uniform, the bloodstains a stark testament to her sacrifice, she caught Robert's gaze. He nodded once, a silent promise to guard her secret, and in that moment, she felt a flicker of hope, a hope that truth, however buried, would find its way to the light. The security office of the Grayson mansion was a claustrophobic sanctuary, a stark contrast to the opulent foyer it monitored. Its walls were lined with blinking monitors, their cold blue glow casting an eerie pallor over the cluttered desk strewn with coffee mugs and forgotten papers. A single desk lamp spilled warm amber light, a feeble attempt to soften the room's sterile chill. Outside, the storm had settled into a mournful drizzle, its faint patter seeping through a small, condensation-streaked window. But inside, a different tempest raged, one of doubt and dawning betrayal. Daniel Grayson sat hunched over the desk, his tailored Armani suit wrinkled from a sleepless night, his steel blue eyes fixed on the monitors with a ferocity that belied the exhaustion etched into his face. At 40-something, he was a man accustomed to command, yet now he felt adrift, his world tilting on the axis of a truth he hadn't dared to question until this moment. His heart pounded, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the storm's fading thunder. The image of his father, William, sobbing in Elena's arms haunted him, as did the blood staining her uniform and the smug curl of Margaret's lips. Daniel's fingers hovered over the playback controls, trembling with a mix of dread and determination. He'd returned from his business trip expecting the familiar weight of his family's dysfunction, but not this. Not a scene that tore at the seams of everything he thought he knew. The timestamp on the monitor read 11:47 p.m., and as he pressed play, the footage unfolded like a wound reopening. On the screen, Elena Torres moved with quiet grace, her simple maid's uniform a stark contrast to the grandeur of the foyer. She guided William Grayson gently toward the stairs, her warm brown eyes soft with patience as he mumbled in confusion, his frail hands clutching her arm. Her voice, captured by the camera's audio, was a soothing balm. "It's all right, Mr. Grayson. Let's get you to bed." The words were tender, a lifeline for a man lost in the fog of Alzheimer's. Daniel's chest tightened, a pang of guilt slicing through him as he watched her care for his father with a devotion he'd never fully acknowledged. Then Margaret burst into the frame, her emerald gown shimmering like a predator's scales. Her steps were unsteady, bourbon sloshing in the crystal tumbler she gripped, her face twisted with rage. "Get your filthy hands off him!" she shrieked, her voice a blade that cut through the foyer's stillness. Daniel leaned closer, his breath shallow, as he watched Elena turn to shield William, her body a barrier against Margaret's fury. The tumbler flew, shattering against Elena's back in a cascade of glass and liquor. Elena gasped, pain flashing across her face, but her arms never wavered, holding William close as he whimpered. Daniel's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles whitening as he saw the blood seep through her uniform, a crimson stain spreading like an accusation. But it was what happened next that stopped his heart. Margaret, thinking herself unseen, knelt briefly beside William, her manicured fingers rifling through his pockets with a furtive urgency. Her eyes darted around the foyer, a predator ensuring her prey was alone. She was searching for something, Daniel realized, his pulse racing as the pieces of the puzzle began to shift. The footage showed her standing, her expression morphing from rage to a calculated smirk, her crocodile tears materializing as she prepared her performance for Daniel's arrival. The betrayal was a physical weight, pressing against his chest, stealing his breath. "She lied," Daniel whispered, his voice raw with fury and shame. "She lied to me." His fingers shook as he rewound the footage, watching it again, each replay a hammer strike to the foundation of his trust. Margaret's rage, Elena's sacrifice, his father's fear, It was all laid bare, a truth he'd been too blind to see. His mind replayed the moment he dismissed Elena, his words heavy with disappointment he now knew she didn't deserve. Guilt coiled in his gut, a serpent that twisted tighter with every second of the footage. He leaned back in the chair, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The monitors flickered, their blue light casting shadows that danced across his face, mirroring the turmoil within. He'd built his life on control, million-dollar deals, a legacy carved in stone. But this moment stripped him bare, leaving only a son desperate to protect his father and a man desperate to right a wrong. Elena's face flashed in his mind, her quiet dignity despite the blood, her whispered promise to William. And then there was the box, the small wooden box she'd slipped to Robert, her eyes pleading for secrecy. What was in it? What truth was she guarding with such fierce loyalty? Daniel's hand reached for his phone, his fingers trembling as he prepared to call Robert. The box was the key, he was certain of it, a piece of the puzzle that could unravel Margaret's lies. His heart pounded with a mix of anger and hope, a fire kindled by the realization that he'd failed Elena, but he could still make it right. The storm outside had faded, but inside a new resolve was born, a determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The camera lingered on Daniel's face, the blue glow of the monitors reflecting in his eyes, a storm of his own brewing within. The mansion, once a monument to wealth, now felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse under the weight of secrets too long buried. The study of the Grayson mansion was a sanctuary of secrets, its oak bookshelves towering like silent sentinels over a desk bathed in the warm amber glow of a single lamp. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and ink, a faint ticking from a grandfather clock marking the passage of a night that felt endless. Outside, the storm had softened to a gentle drizzle, its whispers seeping through the condensation in streaked windows, but inside a different kind of tempest raged, one of revelation and betrayal. Daniel Grayson sat at the desk, his Armani suit unbuttoned, his tie discarded like a shed skin. At 40-something, his steel blue eyes were hollow with exhaustion, yet they burned with a desperate need for truth. His hands, usually steady in the chaos of boardrooms, trembled as they hovered over a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by time and secrets. Daniel's heart pounded, a relentless drumbeat echoing the turmoil that had kept him awake since the foyer's chaos. The security footage played in his mind like a haunting reel. Elena's bloodied uniform, his father's frightened whimpers, Margaret's calculated smirk. The weight of his mistake pressed against his chest, a suffocating guilt for dismissing Elena, for believing his wife's lies. Now, as he stared at the box Elena had entrusted to Robert, he felt the stirrings of a truth that could unravel everything. His fingers brushed the lid, his breath shallow, as if opening it might unleash a storm far greater than the one outside. Robert, the head butler, stood across from him, his gray suit as crisp as his loyalty. At 60, his kind eyes carried the weight of decades serving the Grayson family, lines etched deep by truths he'd never spoken. "Open it, Robert," Daniel said, his voice low and urgent, laced with a desperation he could no longer conceal. Robert hesitated, his brow furrowing with unease, but he nodded, his hands steady as he unlatched the box. Inside lay a single, yellowed letter, its wax seal cracked and faded, bearing the Grayson crest. Daniel's pulse quickened, his fingers trembling as he broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was his father's, shaky, deliberate, a relic of a mind still clinging to clarity. Daniel's voice cracked as he read aloud, each word a stone dropped into the still waters of his heart. "If you're reading this, my mind may already be gone," the letter began. "Carmen Torres saved my life. Not just once, but twice. She stopped me in my darkest hour, and years later, she shielded me from a truth I couldn't face." Daniel's breath hitched, his eyes scanning the words as the room seemed to close in. The letter revealed a story buried in the shadows of the Grayson legacy. Carmen Torres, a housekeeper in the 1980s, had pulled William from the wreckage of a car accident, a crash orchestrated by Margaret, then Daniel's fiancée, to secure her place in the family's fortune. The words seared into Daniel's mind, each one a betrayal that cut deeper than the last. Margaret, she tried to kill him? Daniel whispered, his voice raw with shock and fury. His hands gripped the letter, the paper crinkling under the pressure. He looked up at Robert, seeking confirmation, but the butler's solemn nod was answer enough. Robert stepped closer, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of years unspoken. "There's more, sir," he said, his tone resolute. "The letter mentions a fund, a trust Mr. Grayson set up for Carmen, for redemption. Margaret's been draining it for years." A second sheet slipped from the letter, listing bank transfers redirected to offshore accounts under Margaret's name. Each transaction a silent theft from a man too frail to fight back. Daniel's world tilted, the foundation of his life crumbling beneath him. His wife, the woman he'd trusted, had not only attacked Elena, but had betrayed his father in ways he'd never imagined. The guilt was a vice around his heart. Guilt for doubting Elena, for failing his father, for being blind to the serpent in his home. His mind flashed to Elena's face, her quiet dignity as she shielded William, her blood staining the foyer floor. She'd known something, he realized, her secretive glance to Robert in the foyer, now a blazing signal. The box, the letter. It was her way of protecting a truth she couldn't yet speak. He leaned back in the chair, the letter trembling in his hands, its smudged ink a testament to his father's fading clarity. Anger surged through him, a molten fire that threatened to consume the last of his restraint. But beneath it lay a deeper pain, a longing to make things right, to reclaim the family he'd let slip through his fingers. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Carmen shielded me from a truth I couldn't face." What truth? And why had Elena, a stranger to this house 3 years ago, been chosen to guard it? Daniel's gaze drifted to the phone on the desk, his fingers itching to call Robert back, to demand answers about the box's origins. But a part of him already knew. The answers lay with Elena, with the woman who'd bled for his father's safety. His heart ached with the weight of his failure, but it also burned with a new resolve. He would find her, confront the truth, and unravel the lies that had poisoned his family. The mansion, once a monument to wealth, now felt like a labyrinth of deceit, and Daniel was determined to find his way out. The camera lingered on the letter, its faded ink glowing under the lamp's warm light, a fragile bridge to a past that could no longer be ignored. Daniel's face, etched with shock and determination, reflected the storm within. A man on the edge of uncovering a truth that would change everything. The golden hour bathed downtown Los Angeles in a warm, amber glow, the fading sunlight filtering through the modest windows of a small medical clinic. Inside, the hum of fluorescent lights mingled with the soft murmurs of patients, creating a quiet rhythm of care that felt worlds away from the Grayson mansion's cold opulence. Elena Torres moved with gentle precision, her simple sweater concealing the bandages that still clung to her wounded back. At 28, her warm brown eyes carried a weary kindness, a tenderness honed by years of tending to others' pain while bearing her own. She guided an elderly woman to a chair, her smile a beacon of comfort. But her heart was heavy with the events of the stormy night. William's frightened pleas, Margaret's venomous attack, Daniel's dismissal. Each memory was a bruise, tender and raw, threatening to unravel the resolve that had kept her standing. Outside, Daniel Grayson stood frozen, his tailored jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up as if to shed the weight of his wealth. At 40-something, his steel blue eyes were shadowed with guilt, the footage from the security office playing in his mind like a relentless accusation. He'd seen Elena shield his father, seen Margaret's lies unfold in stark clarity, seen the small wooden box that held a truth he couldn't yet grasp. His heart pounded with a mix of shame and urgency, each beat a reminder of his failure to see the truth sooner. He watched Elena through the clinic's window, her gentle movements a stark contrast to the chaos of the mansion, and felt a pang of regret so sharp it stole his breath. This was no mere maid. This was a woman who bled for his family, and he'd cast her out. "Elena," he called softly, his voice barely carrying over the street's hum as he stepped inside. Elena turned, her expression a flicker of surprise laced with wariness, her hands pausing mid-motion as she adjusted a patient's blanket. Her eyes met his, searching for intent, and she nodded, gesturing toward a small coffee shop across the street. The camera followed them, a gentle dolly capturing the transition from the clinic's sterile light to the cozy warmth of the coffee shop, where wooden tables and soft lamps created an intimate haven. They sat in a corner booth, the air thick with unspoken words. The faint clink of Elena's spoon against her coffee cup, a metronome to their tension. Daniel leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly, his voice thick with shame. "I saw the security footage, Elena," he said, his words heavy with regret. "You were protecting him. Margaret lied, and I believed her. I'm so sorry." His eyes searched hers, pleading for forgiveness. But beneath the guilt lay a deeper desperation, a need to understand the letter, the box, the truth that had upended his world. Elena's fingers tightened around her cup, her breath catching as she processed his words. The pain of that night, the vase, the blood, the dismissal, flared anew, but so did a flicker of relief. Someone had seen the truth, even if it came too late. "I'd never harm Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice soft but steady, a quiet strength that belied the tremor in her hands. "He's like family to me." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of 3 years of devotion, of nights spent soothing William's fears, of a bond forged in the quiet moments when no one else cared. Daniel's heart clenched, the sincerity in her eyes a mirror to his own failures as a son. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as if the truth he sought might shatter the fragile moment. "There's more," he said, his tone urgent but gentle. "The letter, it mentioned Carmen Torres, your mother. Was she the housekeeper who worked for us in the 80s? The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Elena's face paled, her fingers stilling on the cup as her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She took a deep breath, her voice breaking as she spoke, each word a thread unraveling a long-buried truth. "She was," Elena whispered, her gaze distant, as if seeing her mother's face in the steam rising from her coffee. "She told me stories about a little boy she helped raise, a boy whose mother died, leaving a father too broken to show love." Her words were a quiet ache, painting a picture of a woman who'd loved fiercely despite the world's constraints. Daniel's breath caught, his mind reeling as he pictured his own childhood, the distant father, the absent mother, the housekeeper whose warmth he'd forgotten until now. Elena continued, her voice trembling but resolute. "She loved your father, Mr. Grayson. Not his wealth, but his heart. She saved him from a car accident, one Margaret caused to secure her place in your family. When she realized she was pregnant with me, she left to protect you all from scandal." The revelation landed like a thunderclap, each word a blow to Daniel's understanding of his family. His eyes widened, his world tilting as the pieces fell into place. Carmen, the housekeeper he barely remembered, had been more than a servant. She'd been his father's savior, and Elena was her legacy. "You're my half-sister?" Daniel whispered, his voice raw with shock and wonder. The coffee shop seemed to fade, the world narrowing to the woman before him, her eyes mirroring his own in ways he'd never noticed. Elena nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she met his gaze. "Your father knew," she said softly. "He saw her in me. The lullabies I hum, the stories I told him. He made me promise to keep it secret until he couldn't remember anymore." Her voice broke, the weight of that promise a burden she'd carried alone. Daniel reached out, his hand hesitating before resting gently on hers, a gesture of connection that felt both foreign and vital. "Elena, your family," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and I've failed you." His heart ached with the magnitude of the truth, a sister he'd never known, a betrayal he'd never seen. Elena's eyes softened, a flicker of hope breaking through her pain, but the weight of her sacrifice lingered, a silent testament to her love for a family that had cast her out. The camera lingered on their clasped hands, the warm light of the coffee shop wrapping them in a fragile cocoon, a moment of truth amidst a storm of lies. The main parlor of the Grayson mansion was a cathedral of elegance, its tall windows spilling soft morning light across velvet armchairs and polished mahogany tables. The air carried the faint scent of roses from the garden outside, mingling with the tension that hung like a storm cloud over the gathered household staff. The room, once a stage for lavish gatherings, now felt like a courtroom, each occupant waiting for a verdict that would reshape the Grayson legacy. Daniel Grayson stood at the center, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the vulnerability in his steel blue eyes. At 40-something, he was a man forged in boardrooms. But today, he was a son and a brother, his heart pounding with a resolve born of betrayal and newfound kinship. Beside him stood Elena Torres, her simple blouse a quiet defiance against the opulence around her. At 28, her warm brown eyes shimmered with a mix of hope and trepidation, her posture steady, despite the weight of the night that had changed everything. The staff sat in rows, their faces a mosaic of curiosity and apprehension. Maids in crisp uniforms, gardeners in worn jackets, cooks with flour-dusted aprons. Their whispers rustled like leaves, a quiet rebellion against the silence that had long cloaked the mansion's truce. Robert, the head butler, stood near the fireplace, his gray suit immaculate, his kind eyes gleaming with pride and relief. At 60, he was a pillar of loyalty, his presence a testament to the trust Elena had placed in him with the wooden box. Margaret Grayson lingered near the doorway, her designer dress clinging to her like armor, but her sharp features betrayed a flicker of panic. Her manicured hands clutched her purse, her green eyes darting as if seeking an escape from the judgment closing in. Daniel's voice broke the silence, firm and authoritative, cutting through the parlor's tension like a blade. "Thank you all for gathering here," he said, his gaze sweeping the room, commanding attention. "I have an announcement that changes everything." His heart raced, a mix of anger and determination fueling his words. The memory of the security footage burned in his mind. Margaret's vicious attack, Elena's sacrifice, the letter's damning revelations. His chest ached with the weight of his failure to see the truth. But today he would set it right. He gestured to Elena, his voice softening, a brother's warmth breaking through his resolve. "Elena Torres is not returning as our employee. She is returning as family, my half-sister." Gasps rippled through the room, a wave of shock that stirred the air. A maid clutched her apron, her eyes wide. A gardener exchanged a knowing nod with a colleague. Robert's lips curved into a proud smile, his faith in Elena vindicated. But Margaret's face contorted, her composure shattering as she stepped forward, her voice shrill with desperation. "This is absurd, Daniel," she cried, her hands trembling as she gripped her purse. "She's manipulating you, a maid with no proof." Her words were a frantic plea, a last attempt to cling to the facade she'd built, but they fell hollow against the truth now laid bare. Daniel raised a hand, his gaze cold as steel, silencing her with a look that carried years of unspoken doubts. "The proof is in the security footage, Margaret," he said, his voice icy but controlled. "And in a letter from my father, you attacked Elena. You tried to harm him years ago in that car accident, and you've been stealing from his foundation for your own greed." Each word was a hammer strike, dismantling the lies that had propped up her reign. His heart pounded with a fury he could barely contain, but beneath it lay a deeper pain. A son betrayed, a brother awakened to a sister he'd never known. Robert stepped forward, holding a folder of documents. Bank records, forged signatures, a trail of Margaret's deceit. "Mrs. Grayson threatened us to stay silent," he said, his voice calm but resolute, his eyes meeting Daniel's with unwavering loyalty. "But we've always known Elena's heart was true." His words stirred the staff, their murmurs growing bolder, a collective defiance against the tyranny that had ruled the mansion. A staff member, a woman in her 40s with a gardener's calloused hands, stood, her voice trembling but brave. "She tried to bribe me last year to lie about Mr. Grayson's condition," she said, her eyes darting to Margaret. "I couldn't do it." Margaret stumbled back, her face a mask of panic, her purse slipping from her hands as the room closed in. Her green eyes darted wildly, searching for an ally, but found only judgment. The staff's gazes were a chorus of accusation, their silence louder than any shout. Daniel stepped closer to Elena, placing a protective hand on her shoulder, his touch a silent vow of kinship. "Margaret, you're finished here," he said, his voice steady with finality. "The authorities have been informed. Elena will take over management of this estate in my father's care. Anyone who objects is free to leave. Elena's heart swelled, a flood of relief and gratitude washing over her. Her eyes glistened with tears, not of pain but of belonging, a feeling she'd longed for since her mother's stories of the Grayson family. She stood taller, her dignity unbroken, her warmth a beacon in the parlor's tension. Robert approached, bowing slightly, his voice warm with sincerity. "Welcome home, Miss Torres," he said, a smile breaking through his formal demeanor. The staff murmured in agreement, some smiling, others wiping tears, their loyalty shifting to the woman who'd bled for their patriarch. The camera lingered on Elena's face, her tears catching the morning light, a quiet triumph born of sacrifice. The parlor, once a monument to wealth, now felt alive with the promise of justice, a family reborn from the ashes of deceit. The garden of the Grayson mansion was a sanctuary of serenity, bathed in the golden light of a new morning. Roses bloomed in vibrant clusters, their petals catching the sun's warmth, while an ancient oak tree stood sentinel, its leaves whispering softly in the breeze. The air was alive with the scent of earth and flowers, a stark contrast to the storm that had ravaged the estate just days before. Beneath the oak's sprawling branches, a wooden bench cradled three figures, their silhouettes framed against the dawn like a painting of redemption. Elena Torres sat at the center, her simple blouse a quiet testament to her humility, her warm brown eyes glowing with a peace she hadn't known in years. At 28, her heart still bore the scars of that stormy night, but now it swelled with a sense of belonging, a home found in the unlikeliest of places. Beside her, William Grayson rested, his frail frame wrapped in a cozy sweater, his silver hair catching the sunlight like a halo. At 80, his Alzheimer's had stolen much of his past, but today his eyes were clearer, a flicker of the man he'd once been shining through. His hand rested in Elena's, his fingers curling gently around hers, a silent gratitude for the daughter he'd recognized in stolen moments. Daniel Grayson sat on the other side, his casual jacket a departure from the tailored suits of his empire, his steel blue eyes softened by a newfound warmth. At 40-something, he was no longer just the billionaire heir. He was a son, a brother, a man remade by truth. The garden wrapped them in its embrace, the mansion looming in the distance, no longer a cold monument to wealth, but a home alive with hope. Elena hummed softly, a lullaby her mother Carmen had once sung, its melody weaving through the morning air like a thread of memory. William's lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes closing as he leaned toward her, his voice a fragile whisper. "You came back, my angel," he said, each word a treasure pulled from the fog of his mind. Elena's heart clenched, a flood of tenderness washing over her as she squeezed his hand. "I promised I'd always remember for you, Mr. Grayson," she replied, her voice soft but resolute. "Your stories, your heart, they're safe with me." Her words were a vow, a bridge between the past and the present, a promise kept through blood and sacrifice. Daniel watched them, his chest tight with a mix of gratitude and awe. The letter's revelation still burned in his mind. Carmen's sacrifice, Margaret's betrayal, Elena's hidden kinship. But they had forged something new, something stronger. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a leather portfolio, its edges worn from the weight of its contents. "Elena," he said, his voice warm with purpose, "these are the updated estate documents. You're now co-trustee of the foundation and legal guardian of Dad's care." His words were more than a legal decree. They were an invitation, a recognition of the sister he'd never known he needed. Elena's eyes glistened, not with ambition, but with humility, her breath catching as she looked at the portfolio. "It's not about the money, Daniel," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "It's about belonging, about family." Her words were a quiet revelation, a truth that had anchored her through the pain of that stormy night, through the blood and the accusations. She'd cared for William not for gain, but for love, a love that mirrored her mother's, a love that had brought her back to this bench, to this moment. Daniel nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at his father and sister. "That's what this is now, a real family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You brought that back to us." His heart swelled with a gratitude he couldn't fully express, a recognition that Elena's presence had transformed the mansion from a house of secrets into a home of truth. The camera panned across the garden, capturing the roses swaying in the breeze, the oak's leaves catching the sunlight. A montage of moments that spoke of renewal. Elena and Daniel poring over foundation plans, laughter echoing at family dinners, William's contented smile as he listened to Elena's lullabies. Elena's voice, soft and reflective, broke the silence. "My mother used to say home isn't a place," she said, her words carrying the cadence of cherished memory. "It's the people who choose to love you, no matter what the world says." Her eyes met Daniel's, a shared understanding passing between them. A bond forged not just by blood, but by choice. William stirred, his hand tightening on hers, his voice faint but clear. "Carmen would be proud of both of you," he whispered, a moment of lucidity that felt like a gift. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes, his heart aching with the weight of a past he'd never fully known and a future he now dared to hope for. The mansion in the distance stood transformed, its walls no longer cold but warm with the promise of new beginnings. Elena's presence had brought laughter to silent halls, warmth to sterile rooms, and hope to a family that had forgotten how to dream. The Grayson Foundation, now under her co-management, was expanding, its funds flowing to Alzheimer's research and care for the elderly in need, a legacy reborn from Carmen's sacrifice and Elena's courage. The camera lingered on the trio, their silhouettes framed against the oak tree, a family united not by wealth but by love, a love that had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. Elena looked at William, her smile a beacon of light, and then at Daniel, her brother, her ally. The garden seemed to hold its breath, the roses a silent chorus to their reunion. This was home, not the mansion, not the wealth, but the people who chose to stand together, to fight for truth, to love despite the odds. As the sun sets over the Grayson garden, this story of nourishing justice reminds us that family is forged in love, not just blood. Elena's courage and Daniel's redemption show us that truth can heal even the deepest wounds. What did this tale stir in your heart? Drop a comment with Arshi Shah Justice and share your thoughts. Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Your stories inspire us all. Thank you for joining us on this journey of heartbreak and hope. Hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to stay with us for more tales that touch the soul. We'll see you in the next story. Wherever you're watching from, you're part of our family now.